So here I am wearing the sweater. I'm looking at it. It's 65% wool and 15% nylon. So the material I'm wearing to keep my body warm is made from an animal or animals. There was a sheep that lived. It spent its whole life, probably most of the time, somewhat satisfied, but there were probably uncomfortable moments of its life. What happens is you start imagining the animal. You start looking at the animal and trying to put yourself in the place of that animal, as if you were that animal and had to live out parts of that experiences of what that animal had to go through. So we try to look at the animals and where the animals were and what the animals had to go through. So for me, the whole ethical part of it, along with, act according to as if your behavior would become a universal law, which was Kant's categorical imperative. Somewhat similar to that. And also putting yourself in place of, or being empathetic enough to be able to see yourself biologically the same without the higher levels of cognition, because of the development of our cerebral cortex is of more developed than other mammalian life forms. Other kinds of animals don't have the same size of cortex, which we assume just because they don't have the same size of cortex, they don't have the sentience, which is their being aware of themselves as an organism. So as we go about our lives and we use animals for eating or for wearing, we don't regard that. We don't take the time out to think that there was a being there that had to experience being alive and have to go through all of the cycles of being of a living organism, of being thirsty, being hungry, being sleepy, being awake, being cold, being hot. So there was a center of a perspective of a being that had to perceive a reality from its point of view, and then it was exploited. Humans exploited it. So I didn't buy this. Somebody gave it to me, or it was handed down. My older brother gave it to me. And as I wear this, I think about there was an animal that had to endure. So where I'm getting at is are there real strict demarcations of it's either black or white? You're either or. You're like a Jane, where you wear a mask so you don't breathe any insects. You don't walk around where there's bugs or there's any kinds of other living things. You're very careful about the other living things. So there's a spectrum. There's a spectrum of what's ethical and what's not ethical. If you're starving to death and you have no choice and there's meat there, then you're going to eat the meat because you're going to die or you're going to eat the meat. So there's this. And then if your ancestors were northern latitude peoples that hunted, they migrated out of Africa, the continent of Africa, moved up to northern Europe, had to endure through winters. So there was probably people in the ancient world weren't all vegetarian, vegans, where that was a different relationship. There was probably no sport involved in hunting. It was hunting out of necessity. So if you can compare hunting from necessity or hunting for sport, for pleasure, for machismo, which is unethical, compared to you're starving, you have no choice, you're in the Arctic, and you got to eat something, and the only thing that you got to eat is you got to catch a fish. You can't pick. There's no mushrooms you can pick around, or there's no beans growing, there's no rice growing, there's no corn growing, there's no fruit, there's no coconut tree. So you have to eat meat because of where you're at. Well, there is a line where there is a spectrum of ethics there. So I'm saying that a modern Western person that's concerned about the well-being of other living things should be concerned about when they go ahead, when they buy the burger, or they buy a piece of chicken, or when they sit down and have a piece of roast beef. They should feel guilty. They should feel like, well, that animal, what did that animal have to go through, in its entirety, in its life, where from and is all of that animal had to go through, is that worth for you to have a few moments of pleasure on your palate? And if there was some kind of cosmic justice that could, impose its justice on a meat eater, it would be they would have that person live that animal and live that animal's life, and then they would make them bring them back to where they're at, sitting down at a meal, ready to eat the animal. Now, would they still go ahead and feel comfortable about eating the animal if they're the ones that had to live through that animal in its life? So I guess that kind of an odd way of putting it would be, what if you went into a restaurant and instead of a menu there, they had a big screen TV, and let's say you sat down and I ordered a chicken. Now, when you order the chicken, you had to watch the TV, and the TV showed that chicken that you were going to eat, that's being prepared in the kitchen. It shows the chicken when it was a little tiny chicken, and it shows it eating, and it shows the chicken in the cage, and it shows the chicken, different stages of that chicken's life and what that chicken had to go through. And I guess to another extreme, there could be a virtual reality, virtual world, where you would go into that virtual world and you would become a chicken. You'd live out a life of a chicken before you could sit down at the meal and eat the chicken. So it'd be like being John Malkovich, only you would be the John Malkovich in the cow. You would be the John Malkovich in that pig, or whatever animal you're eating. You would have to experience some or part of that animal's life that you were eating. In a way, that would be cosmic justice, but that's not really, So if you really think about that food, and you're a reasonable, rational person, and you thoroughly examine what that animal was and what it had to go through and how it lived, then you would lean more towards vegan. You would be more compelled to become a vegan because of your being thoughtful about it. And that's just the side of the argument where it deals with the sentience. There is a feeling organism. The animal had a brain. It had a nervous system. It had all of the sensory components necessary to feel and to be alive. Now, as far as the ecological implications and all of the collective behavior of all these people eating burgers all over the place, and having to have all these cows and these steer in these feedlots all over the place, and having the cows had to feed all the grain and water the grain and feed the grain and transport and butcher the cow and have the meat. Collectively, we're sick as a society that we don't recognize that our collective behavior is having this impact on the world, and that's part of the ethical argument. I just wanted to clarify that. I didn't want to give the people out there the impression that I'm trying to compromise. The compromise, or the concessions that I feel pressured from being in the culture I live in, is I live in an area where there's ranches, where it's a normal thing for people to eat meat on a regular basis. A neighborhood where everybody barbecues. I live in a society, in a place where I work with people that hunt and fish and barbecue and eat steak and meat and fish, and know people that all they do is they talk about fishing, and they love fishing, and their whole life revolves around fishing. So it's difficult for me to try to explain my own ideology to these people. So in a way, I have to kind of try to approach it from try to convince those types of people why to be vegan, and not just because, well, your heart will be healthier, you'll be thinner, and you'll look better, and all of the other reasons that most of the vegetarian vegan people out there promote vegan or vegetarian for health reasons, or because it makes them more pretty or beauty, and it makes them thinner, so they'll lose weight, they'll be vegetarian, they'll lose weight. So I'm not, that's just part of it, but to be able to try to convince all of these these cowboys, all these fishermen, all these macho hunter people that love hunting, that love eating meat, that have barbecues all the time, that eat steak and don't think anything about it. How do you convince those people? How do you convince them that, hey, you know, you got to really take a hard look at what you're eating, how you're living, and how it's affecting the other being that you're eating? What happened to them, and how collectively your activity, your behaviors is affecting the world, the earth, the environment. Thanks for listening.